what I'd like to do is, I've got this presentation. I want to share with you, my experience in terms of serving as Undersecretary of State and this new form of transformational diplomacy, which I've learned is the key to not only global technology security, but also global economic security and advancing freedom. And let me just start out by saying I'll never forget the last time I was in China. This is when I was running DocuSign, and I went there and to see if we should go do business. We were in every major country back at that point. That's when we had about 500 million users. And I've been going there since 1981. I'm a lover of Chinese history, culture, the people. But this time it was different, and it was clear that the Chinese Communist Party was amping up their techno-economic competition into a new form of aggression. And when I was flying home from there, I wondered if the leaders in Washington knew about it. And so a week later, I went out. I really didn't know anybody in Washington. I've never served in government before. And so I talked to a few people, and I got, the question asked of me, Keith, have you ever thought about serving your country? And my response was, that was a dream I never knew I had. That led me to a charge that they gave me. They sent me over to the State Department to run economic diplomacy for the United States. And that charge was to develop and operationalize a global economic security strategy to drive economic growth, maximize national security, and combat the Chinese Communist Party's aggression. Now, I was grateful for that bipartisan stamp of approval and that unanimous confirmation. And that's because the reality that we face as a nation and the free world faces is one of ever-increasing cyber warfare with seemingly ceaseless, intense variations of perhaps even weaponized economic competition. And, I learned that the Chinese Communist Party is playing the long game. They're playing for keeps. And a game of four-dimensional chess, economic, military, diplomatic, and cultural, with little regard for human rights, intellectual property, the environment, or sovereignty of nations. So we put that plan together. That plan was comprised of three major pillars. The first is to turbocharge U.S. economic competitiveness and innovation. And the second was, those were things like invest in the American worker, increase access to capital, rebuild America's infrastructure, accelerate the digital transformation, extend the lead in R&D, and strengthen our industrial base. We also focused on 10 critical national security sectors. Some of those would be, for example, semiconductors, 5G, AI, quantum, number of sectors. The second was to safeguard America's assets, and those are technology assets, intellectual property, supply chains, our financial system, educational system, our reserve currency, things like that. The third pillar was to build a network of trusted partners comprised of like-minded countries, companies, and civil society that operate by a set of trust standards. I'm going to talk quite a bit more about that. That formed the basis of what we called the Clean Network. So, on that first pillar, one of the things that we did, because I know you're focused on technology, I know you're focused on semiconductors, is back in November 2019, approached Senator Schumer and also Senator Young on what we ended up being called the Endless Frontier Act. And that was $150 billion in government research funding for those 10 national security sectors. And one of the things that we showed them is we could get that up to $500 billion with private sector match and match from our closest technological allies. That's an example of one of the initiatives. Now that got combined with another bill that we designed, and that was the CHIP Act, which is $50 billion. That's now combined into a $250 billion bill called the U.S. Innovation and Competitive Act, which passed in the Senate and is now in the House. You know, the other big thing was to secure the supply chains. And a key thing was, you know, I knew from my Silicon Valley days that TSMC is one of the most vital companies to United States national security. And I understand my friend Mark Liu is going to be talking after me, and he's great. And we worked together to onshore TSMC. It literally was in 2 weeks' time. And for the biggest onshoring in U.S. history, building a $12 billion fab, state-of-the-art fab. It was a big, big win for the United States. And, you know, when we did that, we had a few theories. One was that it would be a catalyst to get money from Congress, and that there you see the $250 billion U.S. ICA Act. But the other is that they would bring their ecosystem with it, and it would also be a catalyst for other semiconductor manufacturers to build in the United States. And as you know, United States was down to 12% of the world's semiconductor manufacturing, even though we're the leader in the design aspect. And it indeed sparked that, the ecosystem. Pat Gelsinger, who I understand you're going to have at your next class, who's another great friend. They announced a $20 billion investment in Chandler and another $100 billion investment in the United States. And then Samsung's looking for a location to expand. There's $16 billion. So it actually totaled $350 billion of U.S. investment and jobs. It'll probably go down as one of the biggest, one of the most historic onshoring's of all time. And it also shows you how critical Taiwan is to United States national security. From a military standpoint in the region, for sure, but also from an economic and a technology standpoint. And so when I was at the State Department, September last year, I had the honor of being the highest ranking State Department official to visit Taiwan in 41 years. I was greeted with 40 fighters and bombers. And it was a historic visit. It was a great visit. And the big thing was, what was my mission? Because we didn't publicize it a lot, although, obviously once the fighters and bombers arrived, got a lot of publicity. I didn't do any press conferences, but it was a great meeting. I met with a lot, I had dinner at President Tsai's home. She brought in Morris Chang, the founder of TSMC. We had dinner at it's basically their equivalent of the White House. Met with a lot of the CEOs there and a lot of government officials. And the purpose was really to build a foundation of trust and to strengthen ties with Taiwan. And that was critical, because what was to come, that formed the basis of doing the Lee Economic Prosperity Partnership. And that was a very broad, comprehensive economic partnership in everything from semiconductors, manufacturing, 5G, education, economic empowerment of women, all kinds of things. A very deep and powerful partnership. The other thing, and we set that goal in September. We accomplished it by November. And then in November, when we signed that, we set the goal of a science and technology cooperation agreement to do it by December 15th. We hit that right on the head. That's a very deep partnership in terms of the technology. Usually that takes about a year in the government to be able to accomplish that. And that was critical for leading up to a trade agreement, a TIFA. And we laid the groundwork for that. We weren't able to do that TIFA agreement, which would lead to a trading agreement. But the Biden administration is picking up that initiative. Actually, they've picked up almost all of our initiative when it comes to China. And this is critical because if you think of it from a political and from a military standpoint in terms of Taiwan's freedom, Taiwan is a great friend of the United States. They're a role model of democracy in the region, actually around the world. And they're critical to the United States. And so from a political standpoint, right before I went, the president of Taiwan lifted the beef and pork restrictions that was holding us off from a trade agreement. And when I saw it cost them a lot of political capital when I was over there. So it's really important to do that as a friend. But also the thing that I learned at the State Department is that when you do a trade agreement, it's more than a trade agreement. What it does is it creates a halo effect for the United States private sector to invest in that country. And it's a real catalyst for that. And when that happens, it's also a catalyst for our allies to invest as well. And that's critical to support them and have our allies invested in Taiwan, because we want to have them with us if there's something that is going to happen from a kinetic standpoint. So we continue to bolster support for Taiwan, all kinds of different areas, more official visits. I'm a big advocate for that. I'm also a big advocate in terms of involving them more in international organizations. They were a role model in terms of how to handle COVID, and also in some of the other agreements, even the CTPP, which is like a regional trade agreement. So, and then to expand that economic prosperity partnership between the United States and Taiwan with, for example, Japan and Korea. I really think that would be a great thing. So they're key to our national security and critical for democracy. They're also critical to global technology security. They make the most sophisticated chips that go into 5G. You can see what New York Times said. Pound for pound, Taiwan is the most important place in the world when it comes to technology. And that was critical for the whole area of 5G. So as a matter of fact, when we announced that onshoring of TSMC, that was part of our opening 5G gambit in our initiative to stop the CCP's master plan for 5G. That's also when we applied export controls, for example, to Huawei. So just to take you back, in February of 2020, it looked like the CCP was going to run the table in terms of controlling 5G. And 5G is more than a smartphone, right? It is power systems, utility grids, Internet of Things, manufacturing processes, you name it. And Huawei, their national champion, their most important company, and also the backbone of the surveillance state, the enabler of the genocide in Xinjiang, it looked like they were going to run the table. They had just announced 91 5G contracts around the world. 47 were in Europe. Both parties were hitting the panic button, and that's when we got the authorities and U.S. government efforts were failing. So that's when my team got the authorities to do something about it. So, what do? You do the same thing when you build a company. Your first step as a CEO or lead an initiative like this is to build a high-performance team. And that's what we did. Because I've learned with the organization with the best people wins, and diversity of thought is the catalyst of genius. So I brought in 12 private sector entrepreneurs, technologists, results-oriented executives, most of them from Silicon Valley. The State Department goes, nobody's done that before. And then we teamed them up with these tremendous foreign service officers who are some of the smartest people I've ever met. They speak 4 to 7 languages. Their North Star is national security, global economic security. They work their tails off. And I always say, just like when you see somebody who served in the military, you thank them for their service. If you see these guys, you thank them for their service. They rotate every 3 years. They've got to take a dangerous assignment. So I teamed these teams up together along with our 3,000 economic field officers, and it was magical. It was literally, what I would call a 60-60 deal. 1 + 1 = 3. You've got these Silicon Valley veterans that have been bloodied on an economic battlefield. In Silicon Valley, the objective of the game is to be that category king. And it's, a lot of the principles apply. And it was a great honor to lead this epic team of transformational leaders and create this new model of techno-economic competition. So in essence, what this team was the bridge between the Silicon Valley playbook and foreign policy. So we had this team, and so the question was, do these Silicon Valley strategies apply? I taught the class at Stanford, the same things apply to DocuSign, Ariba. I also drew the analogy. We use it same when I was chairman of the board at Purdue. Use it in many areas in the social sector. So that was the big question. So let's walk through that a bit. The first thing we did is we formed a playbook. And that's a vision, mission, values, long-term goals, strategy, all boiled down to execution. It's exactly what we did at Ariba, at DocuSign, a number of other ventures. That provides the alignment and the ability to cascade. That's one of the things I taught when I was at Stanford. So if you look at that mission, the mission for defeating the Chinese Communist Party's 5G strategy was the same answer that I gave in my Senate confirmation hearing when Senator Kuhn said, what would be your strategy in terms of combating CCP's aggression? And I said I'd harness the 3 biggest areas of U.S. competitive advantage by rallying our allies and our friends, leveraging the innovation and resources of the private sector, and amplifying the moral high ground of democratic values. And that morphed into our vision, which was the Clean Network. And that was the alliance of countries and companies, civil society, that operate by a set of trust principles for the purpose of advancing freedom and standing up against authoritarianism. So those trust principles are what we would call democratic values. Things like accountability, integrity, transparency, reciprocity, respect for rule of law, respect for property of all kinds, respect for sovereignty of nations, respect for the environment, respect for the press, respect for human rights. And if you look at those equal trust. And, and these are things that we honor and the Chinese Communist Party does not honor. And they all equal trust. And in my first 60 bilaterals with economic ministers, foreign ministers, finance ministers, I'd be in a meeting and I'd say, hey, how's your relationship with China? They'd say, well, they're a pretty important trading partner. But then they look both ways and they go, but we don't trust them. And that sent off bells in my head because, just a year before, I was standing up in front of the DocuSign employees saying, look, we're not in the software business. We are in the trust business. We deal with people's most important documents. Those are the ones that you sign. And, I said it's the most important word in any language. You partner with people you trust. You buy from people you trust. You do business with people you trust. There would be no business without trust. And I said, we may not take ourselves seriously, but trust is sacrosanct. And man, 5G is all about trust. That's it. That is the trust business. So as we would go around the world and talk to country leaders and CEOs of telco companies, we'd say, well, who do you trust with your citizens' private data, your company's proprietary technology, and your government's most precious information? Is it somebody like Huawei, who comes from a Chinese Communist Party regime where they have a National Intelligence Act that any company, state-owned or otherwise, and any Chinese citizen has to turn over any information, intellectual property or data upon request to the Chinese Communist Party, the PLA, or the government of the PRC. And invariably, the answer to that was no. Okay. And that was at the heart of everything we did, was trust. The objectives, it was more than just defeating the CCP's master plan for 5G. It was also about creating an enduring model, a bipartisan model that could be used for all areas of economic competition, and to make sure that it was duplicatable and repeatable. And we actually came up with 10 criteria for that, and really using 5G as a beachhead for those other areas, and also to be able to build this alliance of democracies. So, in Silicon Valley, we transform people's lives, we transform industries. And the objective of the game, as I said before, is to be the category king, because if you're the category king, you get 80% of the resources and 80% of the market cap. That certainly was the objective, for example, at DocuSign and Ariba, a lot of the other companies where a lot of our team came from. Market lead, the thing is, in a rapidly changing market, everybody wants to go with the leader. But leadership is not determined by size. It's determined by momentum. And at that time, Huawei had all the momentum. So the objective of the game was to reverse their momentum and to replace it with ours. And that was key to being able to do that. Now, one of the big reasons why the U.S. efforts have failed previously with the U.S. government is that the government was going around banging on our allies' table and saying, don't buy Huawei. And, nobody wants to be told what to do. I'm just like thinking this, I just came into government. And so then I said something that I found out was pretty novel in government, but was second nature to us coming from the private sector. I said, why don't we just treat these countries and these companies like customers? And the customer's always right. And we need a value proposition before we get them to partner with us. And that's what we did. And that was key to be able to accomplish that mission. And, don't do it for the United States, do it for yourselves. And we came up with 7 value propositions. The key, though, was to get it to scale. And so the scaling, we use the same 4 principles in terms of building a network that we used at Ariba first. As George said, 3.7 trillion per year of transactions. And also the same we used to build the DocuSign Global Trust Network. It's simple stuff. Maximize the number, out here we call them nodes, but number of members, because the power of the network is the number of members squared. Reduce the friction between the nodes. That means make it easy to sign up and focus on trust. That's why people will go with you. Add value to each node, to each member, and that's where the value proposition came in. And then the fast way to do it is to build a network of networks. And you guys have never seen that before, but we just use those same principles. We also use the same leveraged growth model. That the thing up there on the left, the Ariba growth model, that was the number one IPO slide in 1999 when we took Ariba public. and it shot up that day from 2 billion to 6 billion. And, basically, as you guys know, strategy equals sequencing. And so here what you'll see on the clean network is a series of chess moves that increased our leverage as we go up and increase actually our global power as we go across. And you can see those different initiatives initially focused on technology. Also, we did infrastructure. That's now been called the B3W. G7 adopted it. We had an initiative in clean energy and plans for clean currency and investment. So the other thing, we did to advance those chess moves is, something, again, that's second nature. Create a platform as you expand your product line. And this was unconventional thinking in the government because very rarely are initiatives integrated. And this was a real important thing to do. Here's another one. And that is, it was novel, was a multi-dimensional go-to-market strategy. And that's calling up and down in the food chain. So we didn't just call on government leaders. We called on the foreign CEOs of telcos. We had relationships with those. A lot of those guys invested in us, like Deutsche Telekom and NTT and Telstra and all these guys. And they were the ones making the 5G trust decisions. That was another novel thing. It's like, well, in government, we don't usually call on the foreign CEOs. But that showed the power of that 60-60 partnership. The other key part of the multidimensional go-to-market strategy is that we start at the top of the food chain. So the first place I went was to NATO, the EU, and then this consortium, the 3 C's nations. So when I went to NATO, I talked to the Deputy Secretary General. He goes, we need a clean NATO network. We need these 5G systems in peacetime or wartime. And we can't have, some countries with trusted ones, some with untrusted ones. You're only as strong as your weakest link. And so we got that endorsement from them, from the EU. So now it was not an America alone strategy. And people support what they helped create. And that was really key. And the other thing is that now it provided a security blanket and strength in numbers and power and unity and solidarity against what everybody was terrified about, and that is China's retaliation, intimidation, and retribution. Another novel thing that we did is the area of standards. In Silicon Valley, we facilitate industry standards. That's key. You want to set the rules of the ballgame. At DocuSign, we facilitated what became known as the XTTM trust standard. And what that did was that measured the level of trust in a digital transaction. We invented this category, digital transaction management. So we use that principle to come up with clean digital trust standards, which were those democratic values. And so now countries and companies, they didn't have to use the words China or Huawei. They just said it must meet those digital trust standards. And that was really key because, these principles, which we honor, and the Chinese Communist Party does not, they have been using it against us for their economic advantage. So in other words, if I can steal your intellectual property, if I don't have to be transparent, if I don't have to be reciprocal, I can cut off my own market from you, but have access to yours. If I can use slave labor, if I can use coal-fired power plants, and if I have no regard for the law, or I am the law, I'm going to win every time. And they had been using that for their economic advantage. What we did is one jujitsu move, we actually reversed it and put them flat on their back and use it against them. So if you think about it, what we did is we weaponized the very principles that protect our freedoms. And I could go on and on about a lot of these analogies, but I think the big point here is that you don't have to have a PhD in complex Silicon Valley jargon to understand that the clean network engine was rooted in the most important word in any language, and that was trust. That was the key. Now, the fuel of that was speed, because that's always the ultimate weapon in economic statecraft. I won't go through all these things, but you could see in less than a year period, we went and put on 60 countries on that clean network, and that was key. The speed was absolutely key, and because what that did is it took the CCP's momentum, and reversed it by creating this rolling thunder of wins. Okay, so in terms of results, let's look at that. So we had 60 countries on the clean network, representing 2/3 of the world's global GDP, 200 telcos, 26 of the 27 EU members. That list goes on and on. And so not only did it defeat CCP's 5G master plan, but for the first time, it proved that China Inc. is beatable, and it exposed their biggest weakness, and that is lack of trust. And in the process, it created a proven bipartisan model to stand up against authoritarianism for all areas of economic competition. But, perhaps most importantly, the Clean Network's nonpartisan model has provided the unity and continuity of policy between a Republican and a Democratic administration. And this is so critical to our allies. And that unity is actually what General Secretary Xi fears the most. I won't go over all these, but here, the other thing we did that's unique in the government is we actually had metrics to measure our success. And Nokia's market cap in that less than a year time period practically doubled. Ericsson went up over 50%. Huawei's 91 5G contracts went down to less than a couple dozen. Here you can see the 10 factors that we measured, whether that's an enduring strategy or not. Executability was key. Affordability was key. And we didn't even use any extra money for that. We didn't ask Congress for anything. Okay, key. So there you can see the different coalitions. And then here you can see some of the other areas in terms of clean infrastructure that we've done, clean energy, all of that, clean cloud, clean underwater cable. And, what the press was calling this is, moving away from that America First strategy. And, we kind of went against the grain on that. But obviously it was very, very successful and perfect for the Biden administration. They talk about garnered overwhelming international and bipartisan support. And, so you could see U.S. set out to hobble Huawei, and so it has. I think that speaks for itself. And it says rarely, if ever, has the U.S. Directly take on such a big overseas company and had such an impact. It was really a crisis situation on this. And it had a dramatic effect on the revenue and went down for the last 3 quarters. So, I guess you're doing something right when you get sanctioned for serving your country. Now, I didn't get sanctioned for what I said. I got sanctioned for what we accomplished and the results we achieved with the Clean Network and other initiatives. And I can tell you one thing, I won't bend a knee to Emperor Xi. And I think being dubbed Taiwan's #1 friend didn't score any points with Xi either. And by the way, HBS did do a case study on this, and I think you guys, it was their top HBS case study in that class last semester. I think you guys all have a copy of it, and then you should have a copy in case you don't want to read the whole thing because you guys read so many cases. I think we sent you the documentary on it too. Somebody did a documentary. So anyway, for this small town Midwest boy, it was a true honor to serve the country and lead this epic team of transformational leaders to create this new model of techno-economic statecraft. And that's why I'm so excited. Go ahead, click. To be the chairman and co-founder of the Technology Diplomacy Center at Purdue, which facilitates that bridge between Silicon Valley and foreign policy. So that's one of the areas we're rallying the tech companies, in this fight for freedom. It was interesting. I think it was in January 2020. I brought Secretary Pompeo out to Silicon Valley for 4 days. Doesn't go anywhere for 4 days. We kicked it off with a dinner at my home with 36 of the top CEOs. You know the names of all these guys. And one of the things we did was I had them all go around the room and tell their China horror stories, and they had some. And at the end, I said, look, the Chinese Communist Party is a real and urgent threat to democracies around the world. They're also a real and urgent threat to your businesses because they don't want to just compete. They want to put you out of business. And, we're all free traders. But when somebody comes in the market and doesn't play by the rules, the market is no longer free, and you got to do something about it.